So, hello, audience. I'm Daniel Yates. I'm, as it says in the Learning with a Scientist, I'm a scientist. And this is another scientist, Director of Media of USARK Florida, which most people that probably see this will know who he is. But tonight, our goal is to show people that might not know who he is or might have criticism of him to understand what USARK, if we can actually trust them properly or not, if there's any chance to put trust into them. And so we'll let you go, Daniel. Introduce yourself.
I'm Daniel Parker, and Daniel, it's nice to meet you on here. I appreciate all you're very involved in a lot of our discussions on all of our social media, and I appreciate that, and I'm happy to be here with you. So, are you saying there are people critical of USARK Florida? I thought everybody just loved us, no questions asked.
Yeah, I'm critical of USARK, and yet I still support them 100%. We'll talk about that later. We'll get into that a little later. Yeah, so USARK has been around for a while. How long has USARK been around? USARK Florida been around?
USARK Florida, I haven't been with them even the whole time. They've been around 3 years now, I think, and I've just been on for a little over a year now. But it is still a very young organization, and they formed in response to prohibited species rules being launched in Florida. And it wasn't just that the commission, that FWC was talking about these rules, it's that FWC really did an about face from what they had always done in the past. And they basically told reptile keepers that they just didn't want their input. They were going to do what they wanted to do, and they didn't really care how we responded. And that's why USARK Florida formed. It wasn't originally, reptile keepers have gotten along pretty well with it used to be Florida Fish and Game and Freshwater Fish Commission up until 1999, and then they kind of reshuffled the agency and it became Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And keepers of reptiles have generally been able to deal with the commission, and when new regulations popped up, they were able to work on them together very well. And unfortunately, when the new executive director came in about 5 years ago, Eric Sutton, he just told some of our reptile keepers things are changing, and he shut us out of the process. So that's when USARK Florida formed. It was really in response to that, because we realized that, or the organization realized, and all the reptile keepers in Florida realized, that FWC was going to just try to push these regulations without input. And that's why we had to form an organization to resist that, unfortunately, because FWC had intentionally tried to shut us out of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really big on conservation. I'm from Missouri.
Me too.
Are you really? Where are you from in Missouri?
Oh, no. I'm big on conservation. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I'm not from Missouri, but I like Missouri. I've been to Missouri before, and I really like it.
I explained to everybody I'm a hillbilly scientist. This is probably one of the reasons why most people kind of struggle with me being a scientist. It's like, no, I'm math and physics and chemistry, not biology necessarily. But so Missouri, like, I grew up in the backwoods. So conservation is huge here. And honestly, we have better conservation here than in California and Florida. And it's been quite wild just how, because our state government here is just no nowadays. It's been quite something. So what conservation efforts has USARK Florida been involved in since its beginnings? What are some of the things that you guys have achieved or have tried to achieve?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, a lot of this stuff, when I came on with the organization, they knew that was a big focus of mine. And as you know, you might have seen on some of the social media, conservation through captive propagation is kind of an old motto of reptile keepers going back many years. But I believe in that, and the organization believes in that by breeding animals in captivity, we're actually kind of providing this invisible ark, this kind of assurance colony to keep animals in existence. So we know that many animals are facing challenges in the wild, their habitats being destroyed.
Yeah,
and
I'm not the biggest on the ARK concept. It's very interesting. And
I should add, not just that, but what I'm an environmental scientist myself, and I've worked for University of Central Florida and Conservancy of Southwest Florida, actually doing python research. And I've worked for Ashton Biodiversity Research and Preservation Institute, which their focus is mainly gopher tortoises, among other things. And so I've done a lot of conservation work myself, and that's really important to me.
Yeah.
And when I came into the organization, I wanted to make it very clear that we were for conservation of reptiles, and we were for whatever was good for reptiles, whether they're in the wild or in captivity. And our keepers are too. They're very big on this. Most reptile enthusiasts are conservationists also. So, and everybody was really happy with that direction. We've been involved.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I've seen the people that you've had on, and it does seem to lean that way for the people that we see, at least, that we talk to. Because
we've been involved in gopher tortoises push for gopher tortoise regulations that benefit the tortoises in the wild, not just developers. I've taken part in the technical assistance group meetings for gopher tortoises in Florida. So we've talked a lot about like the non-native species technical assistance group meetings or TAG meetings, but they have a committee like that set up for gopher tortoises too. So I've been in on those meetings, I've observed them, and I've also been on FWC's gopher tortoise webinars. And we've had some cases where, and as you know, kind of one of my specialties is also media. And that's the main thing I do for this organization. And when we've had some instances of gopher tortoises, their burrows being bulldozed by developers, we brought attention to that. We've gotten stories out in the media so people knew that that was happening. And we actually were able, with one of our volunteers, Jordan Spring, she documented these burrows that were bulldozed, and she was actually able to unbury one of the burrows, which FWC said was an armadillo burrow. They didn't even agree that it was a gopher tortoise burrow. And then after she dug it out, a few days later, a gopher tortoise came out of it. And that was a situation we got media coverage for. So we know that the developer entombed probably multiple gopher tortoises, and FWC had to become involved in that situation because it got public attention. And then another thing that we just worked on recently was the venomous reptiles bill, which it makes it a felony in Florida to release venomous reptiles. Well, the problem with that I saw was that there was no exception given for humane release of native venomous snakes or for research. So, for instance, I've done research where we trapped native venomous snakes and we marked them and released them, or we implanted them with transmitters. We've done that with eastern diamondback rattlesnakes, so we can do telemetry with them out in the field. So we use a radio receiver and antenna, and we see where the snakes go. And that's a very common research method. Well, that would have made me a felon under the way that the new venomous bill was written. And that bill was written by FWC staff and lobbied through the legislature. So USARK Florida built a coalition of academics through universities, conservation groups, and we made a media campaign and we pushed for that bill to be amended. And it was. The bill sponsored in the House, Representative Abbott amended the bill and specified it says now non-native reptiles. So the release of non-native reptiles is can be a felony now. It's not natives.
So, I mean, with that being said, we look at some of the interviews. I haven't got my Utah out yet. I interviewed her. She's only been on the job like 6 months. And Utah actually has, like, most states even have this data collection for, like, so they can track the actual migration and stuff.
Yeah,
then, like,
and I've done that exact kind of thing with turtles and snakes in Florida in the wild.
And this is state herpetologists asking the publics to do that. Even California has a method of, they actually don't really do that. They do dead ones. So they can track any diseases that are coming in.
Right. We're doing that. We have FWC biologists that are doing that in Florida. They're helping to track disease, to study some of the, you might have heard some of the lungworms, also snake fungal disease.
Yeah.
And I've worked a lot with our FWC biologists on stuff like that. And we also have a rare snake survey, which I've helped them document a lot of rare snakes when there are interesting records that pop up in places that they might not be expected. So I've always helped with that, and reptile keepers have always helped with that. And this doesn't get enough attention, but there are a lot of really good biologists, really good people inside FWC that
That's what I was about to say.
And a lot of them are not happy with what's going on at the top of the agency. They're not really allowed to speak out about it.
No, that's the thing. Yeah, no, a lot of the state herpetologists, even the California ladies, like, no, take this out, please. Will you take this out? Will you edit this out? Like, they are wanting to be very vocal themselves as well. Like, so no, there are wonderful people in the industry, in the actual state legislation that actually want to go further and save stuff. I actually wonder if the new Lacey Act thing is just somebody overdoing it. But that's another thing, just taking it too far. But it's really a fascinating thing. One of the big reasons why I was like, I actually like you guys better than USARK, surprisingly. And that was actually because of your diamond terrapin tortoise things that you were doing.
The diamondback terrapins, yeah.
Yeah, what did you do to prepare for an FWC, and why did you do it that way?
Some of us have history going back with FWC, going back years, trying to create a legal captive breeding program for diamondback terrapins in Florida. What we've seen is that in the past decade or so, the value of the diamondback terrapin subspecies that occur in Florida has just gone through the roof. And part of the reason for this is there's never been an adequate supply of diamondback terrapins in the herp trade. So because that captive bred supply has never been available to fulfill what has become a huge demand from Asia, people started poaching them out of the wild. And, the values go up and down. So, sometimes people have been critical of the values that I talk about, but we've documented these values before. Some of the mangrove diamondback terrapins, which is a subspecies that only occurs in South Florida, have been known to sell for $10,000 to $15,000 a piece. And that may not be the current going rate. I'm not even familiar with it because we're not allowed to sell them here in Florida. So I'm not exactly up on the current values of all of these terrapins in the trade, but we know that it has been in the past few years. And our argument that it was that if people were coming here to Florida to poach these animals, why don't you allow Florida's turtle breeders, who are some of the best breeders in the world, produce some of the most turtles? We have one turtle farm in Florida that produces over 500,000 turtles a year. And we have many others that produce hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. And why not let them work with these native species in Florida? These are not animals that would be invasive. And let them pump captive bred animals into the trade as an alternative to animals being poached out of the wild. And so that's one thing we've been working with, and then that we've worked on. And then another thing was a big threat to terrapins in the wild are crab traps that drown the terrapins. And we've been vocal about pushing for bycatch reduction devices. There are these little rings that you install in a crab trap that allows a turtle to get out, and it still retains most crabs in the trap. But by doing this, you can at least allow, especially the big breeding females, which are very important to the population, you can let them escape and not drown in traps. Well, FWC did end up implementing that, but only for recreational crab traps. So probably about 2/3 of the crab traps in Florida are commercial traps. So about 2/3 still don't have these devices. And that new rule for recreational traps took effect on March 1st. And on that day, a biologist, a friend of mine, found a trap, a submerged trap that had 14 terrapins in it, and 9 of them were drowned. And one of them was not doing well, and it went into rehab for like a month, and it was released. It did recover. So, in that case, 14 terrapins got caught in a trap that didn't have a bycatch reduction device. And that was literally on the day when the law required that at least recreational traps had it. I don't know if this was a commercial trap or a recreational trap, but we do know that traps are still catching terrapins in Florida. So that's very concerning, because that's probably a bigger threat than poaching is from the demand from Asia.
Yeah. The Connecticut has a actual volunteer program for 2 hours at certain time of the year when it's high tide. Female terrapins, diamondback terrapins up there, want to cross the road to get to that high tide. So they put rocks in because the high tide was washing away the roads. So the terrapins were getting into the rocks and drowning during high tides. So they're like, no, they walk up and down this like 2 or 3 mile stretch, and they actually pick up the terrapins and move them over. I mean, this is something it's so easy for them to actually drown.
Yeah. I mean, even people don't understand with turtles. I mean, it depends on the water temperature and a variety of factors. But if it's warm out, especially, a terrapin can't go very long without breathing. They breathe air. So if they're trapped in a trap, they drown.
And what I liked is that you guys, it seemed like you guys had an economist and a herpetologist from out of state do studies to show FWC. And I know they didn't listen, but yet you still did it. And that right there should tell us something. Well,
yeah, what happened, we had actually quite a few very respected scientists. We wrote a proposal. I think it was over 10 pages long. It wasn't very detailed because FWC didn't really show that much interest. It was more just making the case for what a breeding program could do to affect this demand from Asia, and how putting captive bred animals into the market would affect the price. And we had multiple scientists that endorsed this. We also had an economist that wrote a positive statement about it. But unfortunately, FWC, their response to it, one of the commissioners thought it was a good idea. Unfortunately, by the time FWC actually considered the proposal, he had left the commission, or he was not reappointed as a commissioner. And they made that very clear at the meeting where they addressed the terrapin issue. We're only doing this because Commissioner Soul wanted to do it. And they proceeded to show pictures of turtles that were poached and turtles being smuggled and wrapped in duct tape and all kinds of inhumane things. And they basically made it look like this is who turtle keepers are. This is who reptile keepers are. And most of the animals they ship die. And it was pretty offensive to us. And they mentioned our proposal in their talk. They had an hour-long talk, and they mentioned our proposal one time. They didn't mention any details from it. We weren't, so it was really disheartening that it was just a slap in the face. And they weren't considering the input of their stakeholders, but they also weren't even considering the input of respected scientists who thought this was a good idea. And it seemed to be
this more.
It seemed to be that FWC, because reptile keepers, they consider their enemy right now, they just weren't going to give us anything. So it was pretty upsetting to see them just totally dismiss us. And we worked really hard on this, and we built a good coalition of people who were in favor of this. And they didn't even let us present our points. I asked if we could do a presentation of our talk. They wouldn't let me do that. We asked for public records back in September related to terrapins, and FWC said they had over 10,000 documents and emails. So we requested those through public record, where they were literally coordinating with other organizations against our proposal. And by public record, in Florida, we have a law called the Sunshine Law, where they're supposed to provide us with public records. We made that request in September. And then I told them I wanted this by the September commission meeting. Well, that got canceled because of a hurricane. So they pushed it back to November. And it still came up on that. I hadn't received any of these records that I asked for. The evening before the meeting, they sent me 8 files of the 10,000 they said they had, and they were corrupted files. And I was able to get some tech guys to like uncorrupt them for me. And it was stuff that really wasn't any big deal. They literally did not fulfill that request for documents until just a few weeks ago. And quite honestly, I haven't even had time to go through all that stuff, because everything else we've been dealing with here in Florida. So the terrapin issue has not been at the top of my mind, unfortunately. No. But FWC continues to not only not work with reptile keepers, but they actively suppress our legal requests. Yeah. They've shut me down from filming public meetings. They've basically kicked me out. So these are legal things. They're supposed to be able to film or record a public meeting.
Yeah, to lighten up the topic a little bit, Legal Eagle did a video on the Sunshine Laws, and that's why we have Florida man stories. It's not really that Florida men are like that much different than the rest of the country. It's just the laws allow people to see more of what's happening in Florida, the wild side of things. But I've met people.
Well, and it should, but unfortunately, FWC doesn't comply with the Sunshine Law a lot of the time.
I had a guy that I worked with that said he from Florida. He's like, when it gets below 50, the alligators don't mess with you. Like, it's just like you just walk up and like, just like, no, leave me alone. Once it gets above 50, it's a little different. But it's like below 50, it's like, no, the alligators, nothing. It's quite interesting. But your terrapin tortoises is where I came in and where I went, okay, I want to support this, because you guys went out of your way to actually get information from other people. You weren't just going, this is how it is because we said so. It's like, no, that doesn't always look the best. So let's have somebody else say this. I don't know if that was your thought. Was that the thought of getting other scientists and stuff involved?
Well, we knew if they were going to do anything. We had an executive director that seemed to just not want to allow any trade in reptiles, period. It's very unrealistic. It's kind of honestly, kind of some animal rights rhetoric, kind of radical stuff. I have friends who are animal rights activists too, and I'm for ethical and humane treatment of animals. Yeah. But we know that some of the more radical fringes of that movement just don't want people to keep animals in captivity. And it seems like that kind of ideology exists at the top of this agency. So we knew we'd have to make a good case. And I felt like we were trying, but we basically weren't even allowed to make our case in front of anybody that mattered. It was decided behind the scenes that this just was not going to happen. They were not going to work with us on this.
I take my bearded dragons to the park because I live in a shitty ass apartment. So I outfitted a stroller I bought for like $20. I bought all the stuff, and all three of them have their little hidey holes that they can get into and stuff from it. And this one guy's like, "Oh my God, that's so cool! You know, I'm a supporter of animals and I support PETA." And I'm like, "No, do not support PETA. That money is actually better hands of like USARK or so many other organizations that could actually use that money way more than freaking PETA." And
yeah, I mean, you have to be really careful with organizations that you give money to, unfortunately. I mean, a lot of what we see with the animal rights organizations is that it's going a lot to politics to keep people from keeping pets or stop animals from being used in trade or whatever. And a lot of it also, it's a huge moneymaker. I mean, PETA and the Humane Society of the United States are just multi-million-dollar organizations. And, you know, a lot of people support them thinking that they're supporting their local animal shelter or something, and it has nothing to do with that. Yeah. So, yeah, you do need to be careful for sure. What organizations you should check them out.
We'll get into more local and state politics after this episode, because I've got a lot to say that you will have some input on that I think would be very big on shining lights on things for people. So like after the terrapin tortoise thing, I'm like, no, you guys are awesome. This is exactly what we should be supporting. We should be supporting people that are pushing actual science. I don't know how much I want to get into this now, but so you guys are actually suing FWC. Now, what I like about this is the way you guys have actually been able to, the court system itself, where it's like, okay, so they're not supposed to have this power. Well, after the Supreme Court ruling against the the FDA or whatever it is that regulates the air quality, and they're like, no, if Congress doesn't give you that,
EPA, I think.
EPA.
Yeah.
And so your outline of what you guys are doing in that lawsuit makes more sense than ever, and might even hold up even more than it would before that ruling.
I mean, it's a little different situation because the EPA is a federal agency, and a lot of people have told us, oh, well, that we're going up against a state agency. So the argument that was made in that EPA case was that a federal agency didn't have the right to push this stuff on states. So it's a little bit different argument. What we're saying is that FWC is given the power by our state constitution to regulate wild animal life. And we don't see the animals that we are keeping and breeding in captivity as wild animals. They are animals under human care. So it's obviously intended to apply to, deer and wild game.
I'm so sorry. I'm about to wet myself. I tell everybody I'm a simple man. I just want to be able to sit down without making noise. So for the audience, I apologize. I spent like the last 30 minutes or an hour of that video with the California lady just hadn't to go. Like, it's just like, oh my God. She was so much fun. That's the type of leadership we need in conservation. Her and Bill, like the Missouri herpetologist, this is real leadership. They were realistic and caring and thought-provoking.
We have some really good herpetologists, some brilliant people that are part of FWC, and they are not consulted in the process of creating regulations. You know that FWC's top terrapin experts told me that they never even saw our terrapin proposal. It was never given to them to review or anything. They basically weren't asked their input. So that's the level of respect we're getting out of the agency as a whole. But there are scientists that are doing really great work, and they're doing great science. They're learning a lot of things. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like their voices are being incorporated into regulations that might affect conservation either, though.
You're
Florida
not the only
is just
state. You're not the
Florida
only-
is just a very, very sad situation where developers seem to control the politics of this state. And sadly, developers are mostly the people appointed to the Wildlife Commission itself. So most of our wildlife commissioners are developers.
So back to the lawsuit. So, you know, they're hurting the deer, is what you were talking about?
Well, the state constitution gives FWC authority over wild animal life. So that would include deer. It would include a lot of other things that are in the wild in Florida, including the herps, but not our captive animals. So like these animals, these snakes that you saw killed by FWC officers on April 6th of this year, over 30 captive pythons. Most of those were morphs. They were bred many generations in captivity. They were nothing close to being wild animals. They were being bred to produce pets. They were pets. And we're saying that that's none of FWC's business. But not only that, the guy had a permit from FWC to have those snakes, and they just decided, no, we're not going to allow this anymore. And he tried to get grandfathered in, and they wouldn't issue him a permit. And then eventually they come and kill them. So,
Yeah,
you know, there's got to be better. That's one of the reasons why we just don't think that FWC should have this power anymore. We think that this is better handled, that what we are doing as captive breeders is agriculture. And we are better regulated by our Department of Agriculture, which is Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. It's called FDACS. And we think that all reptiles would be better governed by FDACS than by FWC, because FWC has shown that they just can't handle this responsibility professionally.
Well, we'll get into my thinking a little later. So the lawsuit, I'm excited. That's how we should be going about it. But it costs a ton to do lawsuits, way more than people think.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. So we could have a bunch of lawsuits against FWC, honestly, right now. And a lot of people, they're like, oh, you should sue them. You should sue them on this, sue them on that. Well, unfortunately, it's very expensive to sue the government. And our lawsuit, we are many hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal bills into our lawsuit. And the people who have paid most of these, it's all been funded by donations from reptile keepers, so, you know, a lot in Florida and then also around the country even, but a lot by our own board members on USARK Florida. So a lot of people don't know, all of our board members are volunteer. They're not getting any money from USARK Florida. In fact, most of them have paid tens of thousands of dollars into USARK Florida on our lawsuit. So this is going to get close to $1 million in legal bills probably by the time we're done with this. So it's very expensive to sue the government. And FWC, their budget that they just got passed by the legislature is over $500 million. So they basically have endless money to fight these battles. And it's really a it's a David and Goliath situation here. But we've already won a lawsuit against the state. Yes. on the prohibited species rules. So with our law firm, we have a track record of being able to beat the state, even though it's a David and Goliath situation, and that's what we're trying to do again.
Yeah, and I love that. I watched Father Fish today. on his thinking on the deal, and they actually call you guys out. Like, not like they're calling you out like that. They're like, no, these guys, they even like use you guys as tag. You guys are the head of tag. And it's like,
Well,
wow, okay.
We've worked really hard. I mean, to be honest, we've worked very hard to coordinate with all the animal industries in Florida and all the animal keepers. So
fish keepers and
absolutely
rabbit keepers and bird keepers, they should all go and support you. I almost think I might want to change the title that, stop supporting PETA and go and put your trust in you. Can we put our trust in USARK?
Well, I like the sound of that. I like to hear that for sure. One of my favorite comments, everybody got so mad at FWC with the snake killing incident. And one of my favorite comments on the FWC page, somebody said, please put USARK Florida in charge of conservation in Florida instead of FWC, which I just loved that.
Oh man, dude. So if this already hasn't persuaded anybody that you guys actually care about conservation at all, that you guys are actually for more, and you're not for just, you're like me. It's not about no regulation. It's about smart regulation. I constantly tell people you shouldn't want laws about control of any kind. You should want a law. So in America, in Canada, people run into houses with their cars all the time. It's an actual super common thing. It's way more common than most people think. What Denmark did was actually shrink their roads, made them less, like thinner and a little curvier. So what that did was make people put more thought into things. And so that's what I'm for.
Yeah, and that's part of our problem with FWC too, is that, for instance, in these prohibited species laws, they didn't do proper scientific evaluation.
No,
they didn't. That they never assessed iguanas. They didn't do a scientific assessment before they made them a prohibited species. So they did a media campaign against them to demonize iguanas, but they did not even do a scientific assessment. How can you ban a species without even doing a scientific assessment on it? The problem with what FWC's done is they've acted politically to address what they see as a political issue, which is invasive species in Florida. And there is an issue with invasive species in Florida. But the problem is that none of FWC's solutions in recent years has worked. In fact, since the prohibited species rules took effect, we've seen an explosion in the populations of iguanas and tegus. And at the last FWC meeting, Mike Lorette, who's a biologist in South Florida, said he has the data to show this, that the iguana and tegu populations have exploded. And we're seeing that with our own eyes. And part of the reason for this is they ban iguanas and tegus, basically ban them from being taken out of the wild and exported. So it's almost like they made them a protected species. And now FWC will tell you, we didn't ban it. You can still get a permit and you have to pit tag them. There's all these regulations. You have to pit tag, which is a microchip. You have to get them out of the state within 24 hours. You have to, whoever keeps them has to have a commercial facility. You have to report GPS locations of wherever you catch them. There's so much red tape, plus the fact that you can't really pit tag baby iguanas or baby tegus safely. It's not safe for the animals. So most people just aren't participating in this. There are only 14 permit holders that I'm aware of. So basically what happened in Florida is we had around 1 million iguanas per year going out of state that were being taken out of the wild in Florida and being exported out of state. FWC basically stopped that. So all of those iguanas now for like 3 years are now growing up in the wild. All those baby iguanas that would have been collected, and that's primarily what collectors were catching, is babies.
Yeah.
They've grown up, and now those are turning into adult iguanas that are breeding on their own now. So it's been tremendously counterproductive in actually battling. I would call an iguana an established non-native, but it hasn't really worked to reduce those populations.
So we can't rely on FWC for conservation in Florida. What can the people themselves do for conservation of Florida?
I mean, I think if you're a reptile keeper, we always encourage responsible pet ownership. So we're going to talk about, you shouldn't be releasing any non-native animals into the wild. You know how much that hurts us as pet keepers, in addition to the potential environmental damage that you could cause. So if you're a reptile keeper, there's step one right there. But we do know that many of these species established are from decades ago. Iguanas, probably the first records of them, I believe, are in the 50s. So a long, long time ago. So that's not really this generation of keepers' issue. It's not their fault that there's iguanas living in the wild. But it's a little discouraging because the biggest thing that could happen in Florida would be to protect land. And that's big money. That's big money. And developers are trying to develop every last square inch in Florida. So I would say look at who you're voting at, support politicians that want to actually protect land. A lot of them say they're pro-conservation, but you need to look at exactly what they mean by that, because it seems like there's a whole lot of developers in Florida that are bulldozing a whole lot of land while at the same time claiming they're pro-conservation, which includes our commissioners on the FWC commission. So I think the biggest thing is just protecting land, because once it turns into a parking lot or once it's houses, it ain't ever going back. And I even heard a rancher say that a lot of ranchers have sold out for development, and a lot of farmers in Florida have sold out their land because the values have gone up. But a lot of them are really depressed that they've done that. And one farmer said houses are the last crop that'll ever be planted on that land. And that's the truth. That's the end. That's basically the end. So once it turns into houses and parking lots and shopping centers, it's never going back.
I will leave a link below for your website so people can go to donate, to talk to you, to whatever. Just sign up. You can sign up for free just to put your name so there's more names behind them. USARK has actually showed that that's actually a thing that actually works in other states, but it doesn't seem to be working in Florida.
Well, we've run into, and I should say, USARK, the national organization, has a tremendous record of success in stopping a lot of really bad regulations.
That's why I support them.
And even on conservation, like recently, they helped educate the public on a bill in Illinois that was going to allow turtle trapping that might drown wild turtles. So that's something that USARK got involved with. That's a conservation issue. So we're all pro-conservation. The problem in Florida is that we were formed to go up against this wildlife commission that has become hostile. And this is not an overnight solution. I mean, people want results right now, and sadly, these lawsuits take years. So, we still have to wait and see, but we've accomplished some things. We got a state law, the first round of prohibited species rules that were passed through the legislature. We got that overturned by a judge. When they made anacondas a prohibited species, we had plaintiffs that were able to get settlements from the state who were anaconda keepers and breeders. So those are two things we've already worked on. We got this venomous bill amended, and we've also opposed we've gotten some changes to some of the regulations on licensing and injuries and bites that were really bad that FWC was trying to push through, and we've opposed them very strongly. We didn't always get everything we wanted, but we did get some changes. So we got that change to the venomous reptile bill, which I think was a very positive change. And then most recently, we brought a lot of attention to this FWC snake massacre. We got worldwide attention for that, and I think that actually helped lead to FWC stopping trying to push this white list, which basically would have been a ban on import of non-native species. We got that stopped at the last meeting, and we don't know that we're at the end of that, unfortunately. But they knew, FWC knew that the tide of public opinion was against them at that last meeting. So if they would have done it there, it might have just been illegal, for one thing, the way that they did it. It probably would have run into another lawsuit. But they could see that public, the will of the public was not on their side with that.
Okay, is Phil Gross, is he on the board of USARK Florida?
It's Phil Goss. He's the president of USARK, of the national organization. And he's not on the board of USARK Florida, but he is an advisor. And he's still involved in what we have going on here. And Phil is just awesome. I mean, just being around him, I've learned so much from him. He has a record of success, and he's a very diplomatic guy. But he's helped us push back on a lot of these regulations. And one of the reasons we needed our own organization in Florida, even with USARK's track record of success, is because we have so much going on down here. As many of you have seen, we're almost like our own country. I mean, FWC is just churning out these regulations and directives and awful things faster than the national organization would just be spending all their time here, and they have a lot of things to do. So we needed our own organization here. But Phil is very supportive. He's down here more than he wants to be, I know, but we work together a lot.
So I'm going to end this part of this here, and I want the audience to go down and go sign up for at least a free membership, see what they're doing. If you think I haven't showed that we can trust USARK Florida, let me know. Let us know. And down in the comments, let us know if this changed your mind, if this helped out with something, understanding that this is important stuff.
Daniel, can I add something to that? If, like I said earlier, you should check out the organizations that you support. And if you're concerned about that, USARK Florida's tax returns, our financials are all posted on our website.
Awesome.
So as I said, our board is all volunteer. Our president, Elizabeth Wisniewski, is a volunteer. All of them have put in tens of thousands of dollars of their own money into USARK Florida. So they're not financially benefiting at all. Some people have accused them of that. It would be way cheaper for them to not be on the board of USARK Florida, trust me. But they've done it out of the goodness of their hearts, and also to protect their own livelihoods, because they can see they're mostly, people with businesses involved in reptiles. And, they can see that if we don't oppose some of this stuff, they could lose their livelihoods. So, we're really out here, we're trying to represent businesses, and most of us are small businesses, but also just pet keepers in Florida. This is not just for big business or something. This is for everybody that keeps reptiles or even just cares about reptiles. We are for reptiles, whether they're in the wild or in captivity. And we're going to continue to fight for reptiles, whatever we need to do. So, and then I'm accessible.
Very accessible.
You can contact me on social media. You can email me, media@usarkfl.net. If you have questions, I try to make myself accessible if you have questions. So we're not trying to hide anything. We're open for people to see. So, even if you're critical, I want to hear from you, and I want to have a discussion with you.
Great. He hasn't even ghosted me yet. So it's like, it's pretty good.
Just a little bit accidentally. if you don't hear from me, I did say I'm accessible, but if you don't hear from me right away, please understand that we have a lot going on, and sometimes I get behind on messages. But I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible, and I do eventually get to every message. So
I can tell you for a fact he does. Yeah, this is, you know, for my podcast and stuff. You know how much money I've made off of this? Not a
lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, not a damn dime.